Good afternoon or good evening, depending on who you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Tuesday, August the 2nd, 2022. So, first question, has World War III started yet? Let's look at the Drudge Report. One giant step for freedom, Pelosi in Taiwan. Assassination fears, world braces for response. China plans 4 days of military drills in areas encircling Taiwan, vows targeted military actions. Taipei presidential office hit by cyber attack. U.S. carrier group in South Sea, echoes of 1996 crisis. UN warns humanity one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. Pretty cheery stuff. What is Nancy Pelosi doing in Taiwan? Is she looking to start a two-front war? It's not enough that the United States is in a proxy war with Russia. But yes, on the other side of the world, let's gin up a war with China over Taiwan. Now, perhaps before bringing the United States to the brink of war against China, it would have been a good idea for America not to become as totally dependent on China as it has. One wonders whether Nancy Pelosi or President Biden or Kamala Harris or any of these people know just how dependent the United States is on China. Hello to Don from Beyond and Allison, Palcasso88, David the Gnome. Yeah, about the stream. For some weird reason, the camera does not turn on immediately. So I have to go back, press back, and then for some reason that turns the camera on. I forgot to do that. And so I had to start the stream again. So apparently no war yet. And let's take a look at freedom in Britain. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police has asserted that authorities need to stop wasting time investigating people being offended on social media, noting that the public is sick of it. Chief Constable Stephen Watson made the comments during an interview with the Telegraph. Watson acknowledged that Greater Manchester Police had become too assiduous at interpreting some of the rules to mean that if anybody at any time, for whatever reason, is offended, there somehow needs to be a police record. We've got ourselves involved in stuff which is just not a policing matter. We've wasted our time as a result, and we've caused people to question whether, frankly, we know what we're doing, he added. Likely next Prime Minister Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss, has vowed to put a stop to police investigating social media posts. However, despite the College of Policing issuing guidance that officers need to focus on real crimes and not interfering in debates on Twitter, the practice still continues. As previously highlighted, a British Army veteran was arrested by police in Aldershot for reposting a meme on Facebook critical of the alphabet people community. 51-year-old Darren Brady was placed in handcuffs by Hampshire police after being told he had caused someone anxiety online. People in the UK are routinely arrested for posting offensive tweets and other social media content. Former police officer James Watts was arrested and given 20 weeks in prison for the crime of posting offensive George Floyd memes in his private WhatsApp and Facebook group chats. Meanwhile, car thefts have been legalized in major cities, and police say they don't even have time to investigate 2 out of 3 burglaries. What is it exactly that the English police do? And turning to Canada, you may have heard a lot of people making fun of, ridiculing people who use the term the deep state. But apparently, once again, the deep state is real, and it's a good thing. So says Andrew Coyne, Canada's leading conservative. why democratic rule doesn't mean letting politicians run everything. It is an elementary principle of democracy that the people we elect to run things should not, in fact, run things. Is it now, Andrew Coyne? They should, as the phrase has it, steer but not row, set the broad direction of policy, but not involve themselves in the details of its implementation. Has he gone mad? A version of this is found in the separation of powers between the executive and the legislature, not the absolute bar in a parliamentary democracy. It is in a presidential one. Cabinet ministers in our system are part of both, but nevertheless an important constraint on both and between the judicial branch and the other two. But the concept applies within the executive as well. A cabinet minister has no more right to interfere in a police investigation or a prosecution than he does to lean on a judge to find a case a certain way. And so we get hundreds of more words of policy wonkery from Andrew Coyne. And Mark Milkey, the milkman, as we used to call him, at Alberta Report, has a piece in the Financial Post. Memo to the right, stop acting like the left. Ooh, more tone policing. The left is long engaged in anti-reality thinking and behavior. Now the right is in danger of making the same mistake. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So he proceeds to give a list of the left's failings, but in stark contrast to this sort of leftist behavior, post-1950 conservatives were mostly reality recognizers. They grasped that free enterprise would lead to reduced poverty worldwide. Democratic institutions based on the rule of law and designed to prevent concentration of power are critical to protecting people's freedoms. Flaws in society were best dealt with through reform and not revolution. And finally, self-government, literally governing oneself first, mattered to a free, flourishing, civilized society. Oh, and let's have a little history lesson here from the milkman. Although some post-war conservatives indulged in extreme beliefs and extreme behavior, they were mostly marginalized after William F. Buckley, founder of National Review, refused to publish conspiracy theorists or anti-Semites. He also made clear that otherwise sensible writers who associated with publications he correctly deemed extreme, his battle against the John Birch Society is one example, were unwelcome at his magazine. How many decades has it been that anyone has paid much attention to National Review? Can National Review be said to lead the way for those on the right? That was then, Milkey says. More recently, a segment of conservatism in the Anglosphere has abandoned such reality-based prudence. Yes, and where's our prudence taken us? It's taken us to Drag Queen Story Hour. Well, no conservative thinker adopts the left's fantasy that human nature is akin to putty. Leader worship is now in vogue among some on the right. This became obvious with the election of Donald Trump as U.S. president in 2016 and the excuse-making that has accompanied Trump ever since, whether playing down his admitted assaults on women, the Access Hollywood recording, or reinterpreting his anti-free trade, anti-free market protectionism as justified. Yes, Mark Milkey is another one of these fellows who worships the GDP. Yes, we need more, ever more free trade, because apparently people in Canada are earning too much money. Apologias for Trump are often anchored in guess, but we liked his policies, Supreme Court nominees' excuses, excusing Trump's hollowing out of fiscal and character conservatism was questionable before the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, but has been utterly indefensible since. Oh, utterly indefensible. Conservatives who seek to excuse or explain away the attack on the institutions of the American Republic commit the same error as left-wingers. And then he goes on to take a shot at the Freedom Convoy. But you remember that bit about not engaging in hero worship? Milkey writes, a piece of advice to those on the right for someone whose career has been anchored in the twin priorities of freedom and responsibility with opportunity for all the goal, preferably by appealing, like Ronald Reagan, here we go, to our better angels. when the other side overreaches and engaged in multiple anti-reality experiments using extreme language and hurtling towards the brick wall of reality. Do not distract the public with your own version of such zaniness. Instead, get out of the way and let the other side crash, as they are bound to do. Is that what they're bound to do? Crash? In my country, not only is, it's a crime to counsel even children against changing their sex. And if you do so, you can go to prison. That's a reality and reason-based approach, wouldn't you say? Those who use the language of tyranny and genocide should inform themselves about actual life in the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. Yes. Back in the 1990s, this phrase, soft totalitarianism, was often used to refer to Canada. It's really not so soft anymore. In any event, there's no free speech in this country, as the Supreme Court has ruled that truth is not a defense to an accusation of hate speech. Let's talk about things causing anxiety. It was Obernois who decades ago pointed out that if things were to be banned based on other people's feelings being hurt, it would not be possible to publish anything, because there's always some people that are going to be angry or made to feel anxious. What about funny cat videos, which we saw last night on Better Call Saul? Well, people are going to get upset at funny cat videos because cats are an invasive species, we have learned, and they are responsible for the mass death of birds. Other people might complain that, I'm allergic to cats, and looking at pictures of cats, it raises my blood pressure, or some such nonsense. So, piece on Matt Goodwin's Substack, The Great Awokening of British Media. A few years ago, a new study caught my eye after crunching data on 27 million articles in 47 media outlets in America. A young academic named David Rosado uncovered some truly astonishing trends. He found the number of words to describe prejudice, discrimination, and social justice, or woke ideology, had exploded. References to words such as sexist had rocketed 130%, racist by 249%, patriarchy by 340%, white supremacy by more than 2,000%, and transphobia by more than 2,300%. Suddenly, seemingly without warning, American journalists were talking a lot about different forms of discrimination, as well as highly contested woke ideas such as unconscious bias, white privilege, and whiteness. Boo! It became known as the Great Awokening, part of a rapid and dramatic change in the beliefs of mainly white, university-educated liberals on race, sex, and gender. Many of the people who work in media, politics, the universities, the institutions, and who regularly consume content produced by the likes of New York Times or the Washington Post have simply become far more liberal than everybody else. They are far more convinced that minority groups are being discriminated against, that America and other Western nations are institutionally racist, that their national identity is a source of shame rather than pride, and that immigration and diversity not only make America a better place to live, but should be its overriding goal. In fact, white liberals, research shows, have now moved so far to the left on race and racism that they are often further to the left than minority voters, a truly seismic shift that some compare to the religious upheavals before the American Civil War. It got me thinking, to what extent might the same trends be taking place in Britain? Ever since the Brexit referendum, we have spent a considerable amount of time debating why the country feels so much more divided. And yet, while we have talked a lot about politicians and populists, we have really not said much at all about the media. So I reached out to David and asked if he would be interested in collaborating and using the same technique, something called computational content analysis, to analyze how Britain's media landscape had evolved over the last 20 years. He said yes, so we got to work crunching data on 16 million articles in a nationally representative sample of the 10 most popular media outlets in Britain, including but not limited to The Guardian, the BBC, The Times, the Financial Times, and the Daily Mail. For our report, we wanted to look at the prominence of words that are associated with prejudice and discrimination, such as sexism, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, and words that are associated with social justice or woke ideology, white privilege, whiteness, cultural appropriation, unconscious bias, and gender pronouns. The results are staggering. Over the last 20 years, between 2000 and 2020, the British media has been utterly transformed. Just like America, our media has become utterly consumed by identity politics, discrimination, and is increasingly embracing social justice ideology. The Great Awokening, in short, is now just as visible, if not more so, here in Britain. As you can see below, over the last 20 years, media references to words such as racism, racist, white supremacy, and xenophobia increased on average by 511%, while words such as sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, and gender discrimination rocketed by 172%. So too have terms such as transphobic and transphobia up 4,143%, Islamophobia and Islamophobic up 306%, and anti-Semitism up 381%. These sharp increases are pervasive across media, regardless of whether they are on the left, the right, or the center, though they are most pronounced in left media such as The Independent and The Guardian. The one exception between 2015 and 2020 is references to anti-Semitism, which were more prominent in right-leaning news outlets, most likely in response to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. Yes, it's striking to me how woke, well, supposedly right-wing newspapers such as the Daily Mail in Britain and the National Post in Canada, that the accusation of racism, say, is no, we're not racist. We're ever so not racist. Racism is a serious problem and must be dealt with. How? Exactly. One hears about campaigns to stamp out racism. How short of a kind of totalitarianism that's never been known anywhere in the world, how could this project actually succeed? We're never told about that, amusingly enough. Oh, we are going to eliminate violence against women. How? How could that possibly happen? I mean, I suppose, violence generally is not a good thing. Violence against innocent people, certainly, but the government is going to intervene to eliminate this? Yeah, hardly likely. And let's take a look at the latest from our friend Frank Wright at his Substack, Here Isn't the News. It has been a wild ride since I last posted on the Parlous State of the News, which, it being composed largely of cringe memes, I suggest we rename to Le News. I told you it was not LOL. Here follow a few obvious predictions anyone could have made which have come true. Serbia is back in the news. Germany and Europe have sanctioned themselves into disaster. Europe faces a serious energy crisis. I mentioned in February that Serbia and the NATO province it contains would become interesting again. This was obvious as Serbia is basically Russia and Kosovo is not a real country. To recap, NATO bombed Serbia for 77 days to establish a Muslim enclave in Serbia, for which NATO insists it is ready to fight. Kosovo is the textbook definition of a failed state. If we imagine for a second that we do not live in an upside-down world where your textbooks are written by salivating perverts who insist on being alone with your children. Kosovo was the big current thing in the late 90s. All the cool people supported the Kosovo Liberation Army and clapped the aerial bombing of Serbian civilians to help them establish an unstable, criminally corrupt ethnic flashpoint. Serbia is now suffering a kind of NATO-pox, with these tiny NATO statelets bursting out all over it like some freedom rash. Montenegro, Bosnia, Kosovo, these are effectively the protectorates of the Rainbow Empire, in which every drastic step will be taken to halt a cold. The outbreak of conflict across the zones of the former Soviet Union, now combined with the fault lines of another crumbling empire, that of the United States, a world policeman who has defunded himself. He has printed trillions to treat a cold by handing out money to his rich friends. He has wisely sanctioned himself to protect himself from having cheap fuel and things to eat. Officer Dibble did a far better job of policing Top Cat and his feline hijinks than has Uncle Sam, whose response to any stimulus these days is to smash the nearest fire alarm and start shooting bystanders. Bad situation inheritor and stutter victim Joe Biden has got COVID again, which is impossible due to him being quadravaxxed and masquerading at all times. And here we have an uplifting quotation from Vice President Kamala Harris. Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong. So are leaders now, are they all idiots? Are they all imbeciles? Inappropriate laughter woman is only serious when he is talking. What is more not LOL than the thought of her negotiating with the Chinese to end the nuclear war her 82-year-old colleague decided to start for attention. At the time of writing, Nancy Pelosi is flying to Taiwan despite strong warnings that they will be seen as an act of war by China. If these lunatics do not succeed in provoking a war this time, then they will come up with something else soon. The adults have been in the room for 2.5 years. There doesn't seem to be a single man in that administration who does not look like he belongs on some kind of list. The rules-based bombings must continue because if there is one thing the world needs, it is pallet loads of US dollars being airlifted to foreign crooks. Again. Okay, groomer is a bannable offense now. And when you ask the alphabet people community how monkeypox spread from adult homosexual men to underage boys, just shut up, I suppose. Germany appears to be on time once more with its mission of destroying Europe every generation or so. Having started strongly with the invitation to 1 million future doctors without borders in 2015, the country formerly known as Germany is now skint and begging its satellites to reduce their gas consumption by 15% each. Germany should really be called Gerwomany now, since it has transitioned into a new and exciting persona. It now identifies as industry-free and has designed designated heating and social order as racist or something. If the countries that used to pay to keep them from collapsing donate their gas to Germany, it may not have to burn the furniture to keep warm this winter. Expectations of civil disorder are unlikely to be disappointed. Gerwoman policy is, of course, to shut down all power generation and make it a crime to buy any from Russia. The former bulwark of Europe now appears to be governed by Bain, whose famous plan to get caught and then crash the plane with no survivors is the closest analogy to European economic policy I can muster. He also refuses to move his mask, which is the pinnacle of sanity and virtue in the never-ending mass psychosis for which no one voted. Stay safe, as the people trying to destroy the world like to say. A man was arrested in the UK for memes, and it wasn't me. Keep sharing to see me in handcuffs. It's what I would have wanted to get manhandled into a van, whilst my spittle-flecked visage spouts asinine internet in jokes. I think this sort of thing is going to happen less, not more, as the police appear to be nearing completion of Project Clown Shoes. It is simply unsustainable for the police to prosecute crimes against insanity while leaving burglary, theft, and other forms of economic redistribution untouched. To continue on this path is to radicalize the normal majority and to persuade them of the wisdom of the opinions of rappers concerning the police. To speak more broadly, the attempt to transfigure reality by changing the names of things has become so absurd as to be plainly ridiculous. Safe and effective. Woman. Our values. Now, the recession, which is actually stagflation, is offensive to the regime, and so the meaning of that word has been changed to align with the views of the party. We are all obliged to be members of the outer party. Remember to applaud when they compel you to misgender the obvious. These are not updated definitions, but a pledge of allegiance to the party to demonstrate your dedication to refusing to see what is really there on command. These people now want to start a war with China, to LOL or to not LOL. That is the question. And let's take a look at the chat. Scroll up to the top. Hello to Adon from Beyond. FDA to the peasants. We don't need no stinking clinical trials. We have immunobridging. Yeah, I'll have more on that shortly. Hello to our valiant moderator, Chogokin 666. And Che Blutarski, hello, says I was in Omaha on Saturday but didn't go to a Cinnabon. Don't know if the mall was supposed to be Oakview or West Roads, but the nearest Cinnabon is at a gas station on I-80, 15 miles away in Gretna. And KMG, did you enjoy BC Day? Asked Palcazzo 88. Yes. Yes, I did. It doesn't really stand for anything. It just was decided that everybody gets a holiday in August. Hello to Art Mob. Did something happen with peaches in the news? James Kirkpatrick had a couple of peach-related tweets without explanation. I noticed this meme about sharing peaches. Apparently that there are so few peaches now that it's not one peach to a person anymore. It has to be shared amongst two people or perhaps even three. I don't really know where this came from, but a lot of people were having fun with peaches. Jeffrey Pye says, looking forward to your analysis on today's songwriting problems. I went to the Osheaga performance, quite astonishing how incompetent the majority of musicians were. Well, just briefly, you know, we are getting Music Monday. Well, I'm going to do it tomorrow. But I suppose I could count this as Music Monday. It could be that people just aren't interested in music anymore. That the idea being that, well, all the good music has already been made. I mean, the good popular music. Why do we need more of it? Art Mob says William F. Buckley had some hits and some misses. I think it was the longest running show for a while. Firing Line. Chokin 666 says, I'm pro peach. A sweet peach is great. Most taste like tart cardboard. I understand canned fruits are better because they are picked and canned fresh, whereas produce are treated to last the shipping cycle. That's from Chokin 666. Jim Smith says, I let my National Review subscription expire about 20 years ago. And, we have cherries. Cherry lovers out there. Jeffrey Pye says, we have peach issues here in my part of the world, too. One must go to a farmer's market to get a peach that actually tastes like one. And rind to flesh ratio is shifting in fruit due to modifications, says Jeffrey Pye. I read a piece, I posted them in several of these pieces, about why tomatoes are now tasteless, and it has to do with creating the perfect tomato, you know, the perfect large size, you know, and they've messed about with it now that it's just like, it's like cotton wool now inside. Jay Boss, hello, says, I can't wait for the generation that asks itself, when will we declare ourselves tired of all the phobic accusations and end them for a good? Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. That's from Adam Smith, and we get that from Tarot Destroyer. Hello to Oscar Toe, who calls himself the Black Swan. Shaming Germany for having social order and heating doesn't sound like envy at all, says Jay Boss. No, they are they are pursuing the green struggle, even if it means, you know, that old people and poor people are going to start freezing to death, you know, starving in the dark. Well, you know, they just stuck to their principles. And Mackinac peaches are the best. Yes, yes. That's from Dan, today's obligatory Seinfeld reference. And Visionary Companion says, I saw Kenneth Minogue on Firing Line and thought this is the best interview program on television. The editor of the New Republic, the first editor of Slate, was a frequent moderator on Firing Line. An intelligent liberal with the fancy new chair, KMG, because KPMG. Okay. This is the same chair. KMG might need a 10-second show intro. The sirens and loud vehicles are the only sound track. We have some movement on Ukraine from Joe Biden, who is ostensibly the president of the United States, that he has a piece in the New York Times, and he makes a bold declaration that the piece is called What America Will and Will Not Do in Ukraine. America's goal is straightforward. We want to see a democratic, independent, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine with the means to deter and defend itself against further aggression. We do not seek a war between NATO and Russia. As much as I disagree with Mr. Putin and find his actions an outrage, the United States will not try to bring about his ouster in Moscow. The Saker comments, now that is a huge change. In Russian, there is this expression of changing shoes while in mid-jump, which refers to a situation when a person suddenly makes a full and instantaneous 180 after pompously insisting on a goal which is now dropped. The initial plan was simple: to smash the Russian economy, have Putin overthrown in an insurrection of some kind, break apart Russia, and then turn towards China and crush it. And considering the absolutely extreme demonization of Putin, he was clearly designated as the object of total hate by all of progressive and freedom-loving mankind. And now Biden generously will allow Putin to stay in power. Biden continues, we will also continue reinforcing NATO's eastern flank with forces and capabilities from the United States and other allies. And just recently, I welcomed Finland's and Sweden's applications to join NATO, a move that will strengthen overall U.S. and transatlantic security by adding 2 democratic and highly capable military partners. The Saker says this entire paragraph can be summarized in all sorts of colorful ways. I will just call in counterfactual and delusional nonsense. Where do I even begin here? Let me describe the reality of NATO here with a few bullet points. First, its goal, its real goal, of course, not all that propagandistic hogwash about freedom, democracy, etc. The real goal of NATO is simple: keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Second, in military terms, NATO is about 90% USA and the rest 10% riffraff. Oh, yes, I know NATO countries have tanks, aircraft, soldiers, ships, etc. But don't look at what they have, look at what they do not have. NATO is entirely dependent on the USA for C-41SR, for logistics, for the maintenance of its weapon systems, for the training of its personnel, etc., etc., etc. The truth is that the USA is the only NATO power which matters. The rest just serve the PR function of a fig leaf to hide the undeniable fact that NATO is a military occupation force. So it would appear that the Biden administration has come to the conclusion that, well, the Ukraine is not going to win against Russia. But that's not going to make the government of the United States making the military-industrial complex ever richer. There is a piece in Unheard by Thomas Fazzi, which is distressing. It's the horror in slow motion is what we're seeing in Europe. After a decade of financial austerity, is Europe now on the brink of a new age of energy austerity? The city of Hanover has recently introduced strict energy-saving rules that include cutting off the hot water in public buildings, swimming pools, sports halls, and gyms, banning mobile air conditioners, fan heaters, or radiators, switching off public fountains, and stopping illuminating major buildings, such as the town hall, at night. Meanwhile, several countries across Europe are considering dimming or switching off public lights and even adopting energy curfews with early closures for businesses and public offices. And more drastic measures are under consideration, including gas rationing for energy intensive industries such as steel and agriculture. These measures are part of an EU wide gas demand reduction plan, ominously titled Save Gas for a Safe Winter, to reduce gas use in Europe by 15% until next spring. Among the proposals is a provision that officials in Brussels impose fines for non-compliance if they decide the crisis is escalating dangerously. All this comes amid growing fears that dwindling Russian gas supplies may plunge Europe into an energy crisis this winter. Overall, Russian gas exports to the EU are at about a third of last year's level, falling steadily since the invasion of Ukraine. While several European countries have been reducing their Russian gas imports, Russia itself has been reducing gas flows to Europe through Nord Stream 1, the continent's biggest pipeline, citing mainly technical issues. Just the other day, citing equipment repair, Russia announced yet another reduction in the amount of natural gas flowing through Nord Stream 1, which is now operating at only 20% capacity. This has caused natural gas spot prices to surge to levels not seen since early March. They are now almost 10 times higher than they were 2 years ago. In most countries, electricity prices have risen accordingly. Soaring energy prices are already fueling record inflation, close to 9% and rising in the EU, squeezing people's spending power, plunging thousands into poverty, and placing a huge burden on industry. This is especially true for Germany, which is almost entirely dependent on Russian gas imports. Indeed, the country's industrial production has been contracting for over 3 months. Astonishingly, 16% of industrial German companies have reduced production or partially stopped their activities due to the rising energy prices. This helps explain why last month Germany became the first country to escalate its warning over gas supplies to the alert level. The combined effect of rising prices, lagging demand, both internally and abroad, as China goes back into lockdown, and falling production and investment is already causing economic growth on the continent to grind to a halt. While institutions such as the European Commission and the IMF, despite significant downward revisions, still predict a real GDP in the EU to be around 2.5% this year, several analysts consider even these far from rosy predictions to be overly optimistic. Karsten Breschke, chief Eurozone economist at ING Bank, for example, foresees a recession at the end of the year as high prices sap purchasing power. To make matters worse, the ECB's recent decision to raise interest rates will do little or nothing to curb inflation caused by supply-side factors, but will almost certainly further depress economic activity, making it harder for states to mobilize resources needed to cushion the effects of the energy crisis. And as for the ECB's recently launched transmission protection instrument, aimed at helping countries in financial distress, it may only be activated for those countries judged to be fiscally sustainable, a questionable concept in itself, even though the current polycrisis is inevitably bound to put a strain on the public finances of European countries. And this is an entirely self-inflicted wound, but it does serve deep green theology, if it can be called that. You know, the Greens think that there are too many people on Earth, and they want to fix that problem. And leaving Europeans without the means to heat themselves or to, see in the dark, that's one way. That's one way to reduce a population. And this is from Al Jazeera. Russia's top court has designated the Azov Regiment, a former volunteer battalion with far-right roots that was officially integrated into Ukraine's army, a terrorist organization. The ruling by the Supreme Court Tuesday allows for lengthy prison terms for the members of Azov who are accused of harboring neo-Nazi and white supremacist ideology. And good money after bad. You can just never get tired of throwing money down a rat hole. This is from RT. The U.S. has authorized $550 million in additional aid to Kyiv, including more rockets for its previously shipped HIMARS launchers. 550 more. Well, they're breaking out the champagne at Raytheon. Yes, the latest round of weaponry for Ukraine was approved under Biden's so-called drawdown authority on Friday. U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters in a White House briefing. The new aid package will include rounds for high-mobility artillery rocket system launchers and 155 millimeter artillery shells. Did any of you see Karine Jean-Pierre being asked about Pelosi going to China? And she hummed and hawed, and there was a lot of umming and erring. And then she said, I am not going to comment on that because it's a hypothetical. This woman is just terrible at her job. But she did break some sort of ceiling, didn't she? And that's a good thing. Take a look at moonofalabama.org. Russia continues a special military operation in Ukraine in a relatively slow manner. Its military is tasked with the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. This task does not require large movements of the front line as the Ukrainian government continues to send fresh troops towards the Russian lines. There, the Russians reliably maul them without taking significant casualties on their own side. The Ukrainian government and its military continues to commit war crimes. Since for a few days, the Ukraine is firing missiles with thousands of anti-personnel mines into Donetsk city and other population centers in the east. These are not powerful enough to kill, but are designed to maim anyone who steps on them or tries to pick them up. Charming, charming. Their color is green and brown, so one will hardly see them when they are laying in grass or on rough ground. The Russians once had similar mines, but those deactivated themselves after 24 hours. The Ukrainian ones do not do that. They will still be dangerous months from now. Russia has sent hundreds of troops to help with the demining. Yes, and as I mentioned before, whenever I hear the Western media accuse Russia of something, I just reflexively come to the conclusion that this is something that the Ukraine is doing. And, okay, Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan, accuses China of perpetrating genocide. And there's a picture of her here in front of her plane. And there's a bunch of people standing outside in the dark wearing masks. Every single one of them. Our visit reiterates or repeats that America stands with Taiwan, a robust, vibrant democracy, and our important partner in the Indo-Pacific. Alrighty. And let's talk about an epidemic. No, not that one. The new epidemic. Monkeypox. This is from the East Bay Times. And a story by Jacob Rogers. Beloved San Francisco Fetish Festival presses ahead amid anxiety, uncertainty over monkeypox. The Door Alley event, which is expected to draw 5,000 people, comes amid a monkeypox outbreak that has proliferated amid a shortage of vaccines. Amid a burgeoning monkeypox outbreak that has thus so far disproportionately affected gay and bisexual men, Bay Area public health officials and organizers of one of the region's most beloved Alphabet People events are walking a difficult line between preventing the spread of the virus while fighting the stigma of the virus as a disease limited to the Alphabet People community. Despite a San Francisco official's declaration of a public health emergency over the monkeypox virus, organizers of Door Alley, a live out loud leather and fetish festival that's been a favorite among Alphabet People communities in the Bay Area since the 1980s, said Friday they intend to hold the festival this weekend. The San Francisco event, which is expected to draw 5,000 people, comes amid deep anxieties across the Alphabet People community over the outbreak, which has proliferated amid a shortage of vaccines, confronting a disease that has primarily affected men who have sex with men. We can't use that word homosexual anymore. Even men who have sex with men. Oh, I thought you were supposed to call them gay people now. All right. They fear a replay of the AIDS HIV crisis. The confluence of issues has raised difficult questions for Door Alley organizers, public health officials, and alphabet people advocates, even as they press ahead with the festival. If people are not educated and they don't know the risk, of course, is a very, very high risk possibility to be a spreader, said Joe Hawkins, director of the Oakland Alphabet People Community Center. But his organization has also made a point not to dissuade people from attending the party, Hawkins said. You can tell people do not do this, and I just think that here in this country, people have a problem with that. Was this fellow alive during the Corona Doom hysteria? Was he? Have we forgotten that that happened now? You don't have a job anymore. You're not allowed to leave your house. You're not allowed to go to the park. You're not allowed to watch the cherry trees blossom, etc., etc., etc. Oh, yes, and you can't get on an airplane or a train. You know, we've forgotten all that. So, yes, is this AIDS 2.0? That no, they're not going to stop orgies just because of this horrible disease. No, that would be homophobic or something. Let's see. For Stephen Ferris, 34, this weekend's festival couldn't arrive soon enough. Having recently ended his quarantine from having contracted monkeypox and been told he's no longer contagious, Ferris said he sees the fair as a chance to return to a community he loves and again express his sexuality safely. I think our community, especially given our response to HIV, is kind of at the forefront around thoughts around viruses intervention. This event doesn't necessarily have to be a very sexual event, and it doesn't have to be a touching event. It's really a point of personal risk. What risk are you willing to take? And there's ways to mitigate the risk. No, don't change your behavior. No. What happened with AIDS, of course, is that it led to the complete victory of the gay agenda, which we're told does not exist. I wonder if people are going to be as understanding this time around. I think they might not be, actually. Let's go back to the chat, and then I'm going to turn to James Burnham. Here we go. Hello to Ruslan Akhmatov. Anran says, Kevin is indeed very philo. Okay. Blacklisted says, I hated Curb Your Enthusiasm too. Pelosi was a busty beauty 5 decades ago, though, says British American. Oh, Blacklisted mentioned that. Shame in the Seinfeldian sense, of course, says British American. Again, Nancy Pelosi was talking about Taiwan, and apparently she lives in California, so that gives her a special connection to an island that is thousands of miles away. What were those racist dolls Brit kids used to have? Gollywogs or something like that. That's what they were called. Apparently, every so often, the Mail will have a story about seeing one of these, in front of a storefront window, and screaming in pain commences. I find it odd that some say there are too many people, and also people like Musk are saying population decline is going to get to dangerous levels. That's from Oscar Toe. Tarot Destroyer quotes Thomas Paine, ye that tell us of harmony and reconciliation, can you restore to us the time that is past? Can you give to prostitution its former innocence? Lily Tomlin. Why are we talking about Lily Tomlin? I really never found her funny. She did a character. She was a telephone operator, and it was the same gag over and over and over again. And then she got very political. Blacklisted says, my electricity has doubled in cost, yet BP profits 670% more than expected. Moment by moment has to be the least convincing romance, says Palpicasso 88. Yes. Yes, very much so. Anyone seen the Tomlin versus David O. Russell video? It's even better than Torn versus Mailer. I have seen it. That's from Halper. And David O. Russell is creepy. Very, very creepy. And we are discussing James Burnham. And we are discussing his book on liberalism. And just forgive me here for a moment. I've got to open it first of all. That's the most important thing. Here we go. And now it's opening. So we had the introduction, a foreword by John O'Sullivan, and I'm going to move on to the introduction by Roger Kimball. And just let me make this bigger. There we go. Begin some quotations. Thomas Hobbes from Leviathan. I put for a general inclination of all mankind a perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceaseth only in death. And from William Hazlitt, the commonplace critic believes that truth lies in the middle between the extremes of right and wrong. And from James Burnham himself, Americans have not yet learned the tragic lesson that the most powerful cannot be loved, hated, envied, feared, obeyed, respected, and even honored, perhaps, but not loved. Who is James Burnham? How often did I field variants of that question while pondering this essay? My informal survey suggests that almost no one under the age of 60 has ever heard of him. And for most people over that magic age, Burnham is but an attenuated presence, a half-remembered, even vaguely embarrassing fashion that has failed to return. Fins on the back of a model that was discontinued long ago for lack of sales. Ah, yes, speak the glimmers of remembrance. Author of The Managerial Revolution, Burnham's first and most famous book, published in 1941, ardent Cold Warrior, helped organize the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Remember that? And wasn't he a supporter of Joseph McCarthy? The answer to that last question is no. More on this below. But even the hint of an adumbration of a suspicion of McCarthyite leanings is sufficient to expel one from the ranks of civilized recollection, as Burnham learned to his cost. The most notable exception to the oblivion surrounding Burnham is among people associated with National Review, the conservative fortnightly that Burnham helped start in 1955 when he was 50. For more than 2 decades, Burnham enlivened the magazine's pages with his spare but unsparing prose and editorial intelligence. He ranged widely, dilating on everything from foreign policy, his specialty, to early on, the movies. William F. Buckley Jr., the founding editor and perpetual genius loci of NR, called Burnham the #1 intellectual influence on National Review since the day of its founding. In a just world, that would be patent enough for continued interest and recognition. But in this world, the combination of Burnham's ferocious intellectual independence and unclubbable heterodoxy long ago consigned him to the unglamorous limbo that established opinion reserves for those who challenge its pieties too forcefully. In 2002, the late Daniel Kelly published James Burnham and the Struggle for the World, a meticulous and thoughtful biography of this sage political gadfly. If any book could resuscitate Burnham's reputation, this was it. But Burnham is too idiosyncratic, too polemical, and too faithful to the dictates of intellectual integrity to enjoy anything like a general renaissance. As I write, in the summer of 2014, all of Burnham's 10 or so books are listed as out of print or being of limited availability, more limited than available. I'm doubly grateful, therefore, that the William F. Buckley Jr. program at Yale suggested bringing out a new edition of Burnham's classic admonition, Suicide of the West, an essay on the meaning and destiny of liberalism. First published in 1964, Suicide of the West provides an acute anatomy of that species of self-infatuated sentimentality we continue to misname liberalism. Is there anything less liberal than contemporary liberalism? The book, also 50 years on, speaks powerfully to a broad range of current deformations, moral or existential, as well as political. I'll just mention that I think that the right is shy about James Burnham is because James Burnham made it clear that he was not a liberal. You know, David French and the like, Douglas Murray, oh, we're all liberals today. No, not all of us are liberals. James Burnham, who died in 1987 after a decade's incapacity, was an astonishing writer. Subtle, passionate, and irritatingly well-read, he commanded a nimble style that was sometimes blunt but unfailingly eloquent. Burnham was above all a rousing writer. Immanuel Kant paid homage to David Hume for awakening him from his dogmatic slumbers about metaphysical questions. Burnham performed a similar service for the politically complacent. If he occasionally exaggerated the extent or imminence of the evils he described, Burnham was liberally endowed with what Henry James called the imagination of disaster. He was fearless in opposing and exposing the totalitarian temptation, which is to say that he was fearless in opposing and exposing the most corrosive, most addictive, most murderous ideology of our time, communism. Today, Burnham is best known, to the extent that he is known at all, as an anti-communist crusader. He was that, but he did not confine his criticism to communism. On the contrary, he understood that the impulse to totalitarian surrender comes in many guises. That is part of what underwrites his contemporary relevance. The managerial revolution that he warned about in the book of that title was a revolution aiming to repel freedom for the sake of bureaucratic efficiency and control. Yes, the deep state that Andrew Coyne praises to the skies. That revolution has not yet succeeded in the monolithic fashion that Burnham envisioned. He did not, as his subtitle promised, so much tell us what is happening in the world as what might happen should certain tendencies be left unchecked. But who can gaze upon the ever-increasing routinization of life and regulation of individual liberty in our society without acknowledging the pertinence of Burnham's gloomy analysis? Over his long career, Burnham changed his mind about many things. He went from being a sort of a philosophical aesthete to having a serious infatuation with Trotskyism, a form of Marxism peculiarly seductive to intellectuals, emerging in the 1940s as a prominent spokesman for an astringent species of democratic realism. But throughout the evolution of his opinions, Burnham remained unwavering in his commitment to freedom. This commitment had two sides: an infrequently exercised celebratory side, which he reserved for freedom's genuine triumphs, and an oppositional side, which he lavished with cordial hostility on those opinions, policies, sentiments, and personalities that worked to stymie freedom. This dual commitment made Burnham an equal opportunity scourge. He was almost as hard on what Tocqueville called democratic despotism, the tendency of democracies to barter freedom for equality, as he was on communism. Burnham was a connoisseur of insidiousness, of the way benign or seemingly benign intentions can be enlisted to promulgate malevolent illiberal policies. He described this process as accurately in Western democracies as he did in communist tyrannies, and he was tireless in his excoriation of what he called that jellyfish brand of contemporary liberalism, pious, guilt-ridden do-goody, which uses the curious dogma of some truth on both sides as its principal sales line. Kelly observes in his biography that Burnham was the living embodiment of what would later come to be known as political incorrectness. Kelly is right. Consider, to take just one example, Burnham's observation that most African nations were really half-formed pseudo-nations. Now as then, that is indisputably the case, but how many accredited intellectuals have the forthrightness to apprise Robert Mugabe of this inconsiderate fact? Burnham was refreshing on many subjects, not least the United Nations and its disapproving resolutions about U.S. policy. Why in the world, he wondered, should any sensible person give a damn what some spokesman for cannibalistic tribes or slave-holding nomads thinks about nuclear tests. It would be easy to multiply such crisp interventions. Nevertheless, I hesitate to apply the label politically correct to so insightful and spirited a critic as James Burnham. In many quarters, calling someone politically incorrect has become a popular method of discounting his opinions without the inconvenience of allowing them a hearing. It is a clever, if cowardly, rhetorical trick. It allows you to ignore someone by the simple expedient of declaring his arguments to be beyond the pale, extreme, that is unworthy of a place in the forum of public exchange. At bottom, the procedure is a form of political ostracism. The goal is to silence someone, not by forbidding him to speak, but by denying him an audience. This technique is especially effective with writers like Burnham, who specialize in telling truths that most people would rather not hear. And I'll have more from this introduction to Burnham's Suicide of the West on tomorrow's show. So, one of the weirdest controversies of these days. Apparently, Diane Warren, who is a celebrated songwriter, who has written for many, many different people, including Cheap Trick, that I just would have liked to have been on that meeting. Well, yes, your latest records they're not doing as well as we'd hoped. What to do. And someone said, how about we bring in Diane Warren? How did that happen? So Diane Warren has said the unsayable, which is she has suggested that Queen Bee Beyonce is perhaps not all that. And, I don't know. I don't know if Diane Warren is going to survive. And this is from Brooke Steinberg at the New York Post. Diane Warren faced backlash on Twitter after questioning Beyonce's songwriting credits on one of her new songs. How can there be 24 writers on one song, she tweeted, adding an eye roll emoji. The songwriter followed up her original tweet saying, "This isn't meant as shade, I'm just curious." Okay, it's probably samples that add up the amount of writers. Warren, who's written songs from artists from Cher to Celine Dion, continued. While Warren, 65, didn't specify Beyonce, 40, or her album by name, the Bayhive was quick to respond. Singer-songwriter The-Dream was the first celeb to call Warren out. You mean, how does our Black culture have so many writers? Well, it started because we couldn't afford certain things starting out, so we started sampling and it became an art form, that's with a capital A major part of the Black culture, hip-hop in America. Had that era not happened, who knows? You good? The Dream tweeted. Master of words. I didn't mean that as an attack or as disrespect. I didn't know this. Thank you for making me aware of it. No need to be mean about it, Warren responded. If the question was genuine curiosity, why the eye roll? It was very passive-aggressive, one Beyonce fan wrote. Have you been in the game for 80 years and don't know how samples work? One person said. And there's a picture here of Beyonce looking fierce, as the kids used to say. It's not flattering at all. She is baring her teeth at us for some reason. It's quite simple. If you sample/interpolate several songs within a new recording, all of those original songwriters receive credit along with those who contributed to the new composition. One person tried to explain to the songwriter when Roxanne Gay, chimed into the conversation as well, tweeting in response to Warren, now, it was meant to shade. Own it if you're going to say it. This is kind of a boring-ass narrative at this point, and it's sad to see artists attempt to devalue one another, a fan wrote. Warren later apologized, writing, I meant no disrespect to Beyonce, who I've worked with and admire. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. According to Billboard, the song Alien Superstar on Beyonce's new album Renaissance has 24 writers. Beyonce herself, Jay-Z, Honey Redmond, and I'm not going to read the list. Okay, it's absolutely absurd. Beyonce faced her own backlash as well after the release of her new album over the use of the term SP-Z on her new Renaissance track, Heated. Oh dear. Representatives for Beyonce told the Post Monday the word, not used intentionally in a harmful way, will be replaced. They added, the road to success is always under construction. That's good to know. And, okay, more on this fierce controversy. This is from the rap. Songwriting legend Diane Warren dragged on Twitter for asking why new Beyonce track has 24 writers. She got a harsher answer then because sampling. Yeah. And apparently the album is not doing too well. And there's some people are having trouble with this interpolation, as it's called, claiming that they have been interpolated without credit. And of course, yep, it's got to be a black thing. Oh, yes, Renaissance, which has garnered near unanimous critical praise. This is her first album in, 5 years. I mentioned talking about Emmett Rhodes, a couple of weeks ago, that he was required by his contract to deliver 2 albums a year. And it sounds shocking now, but if you go back to the 1970s, pretty much everyone was putting out 2 albums a year. Now, I suppose the trend is like U2, that, it just takes so many years to come up with such gargantuan statements of purpose. And at one point, they scrubbed an album that was going to be released with the explanation that, something had changed in the world. So now we have to do it over again. Of the 16 tracks on Renaissance, the one with the most credited writers is Alien Superstar, with 24. Several other tracks have 10 or more, and 2 of them have 16. The simple, though incomplete, answer is that multi-layered tracks with several samples and apt description for most of Renaissance carry credits for the writers and all sampled materials, though that's become fairly standard operating procedure in modern hip-hop and R&B. Warren seemed to be genuinely unaware. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. The Dreams tweet, which turned out to be among the more polite responses, kicked off a firestorm of replies and quote tweets that ranged from helpful explanation to full-on drags of Warren, who was written, among countless other things too numerous to mention here, Celine Dion's hit Because You Love Me. So, why didn't you ask? Why did you ask people about this? No, because it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. 24 people? I forget who it is. There's some DJ who made this shocking point some years ago that if you look at, say, a Queen song like Bohemian Rhapsody, and you look at the credit, and it says Freddie Mercury, you mean one man can write a whole song? That's incredible. Of course, now, and I'm not making this, I'm saying this about Beyonce. I don't know how she works personally, but you may have heard this term, buying tracks. All of these people are eager to be seen as songwriters, and so they have to have their names on the compositions. And there's a joke about this, change a word, claim a third. So what they do is that they pay people, up front for songs, and then they attach their names to it as co-writers usually. So Roger Friedman at Showbiz 411 says Beyonce is not having a great time right now. Her Renaissance album was released Thursday and has not been a wild success. Indeed, the album has faced a lot of criticism. The bigger news is Beyonce has not turned the lemons from Renaissance into lemonade. That was the title of her last album in 2016, and it sold 650,000 in its debut week. Renaissance is not going to come near that number. HitsDailyDouble.com has predicted today between 275,000 and 315,000 copies. The number will fall on the low side. It's about a 60% decline in sales. Today's scandal concerns a song on the album called Heated, in which Beyonce warbles the words spazzing out. Using this expression is called ableist now in the PC world, but frankly, it's just stupid, coarse, and mean. Who would sing such a thing? A 10-year-old? This is a grown man writing this. Then we have Kelly's, the female singer-songwriter, complained that Beyonce interpolated or covered a song she wrote with Pharrell, but wasn't credited for it in the first place. And then there are all the other samples and interpolations on Renaissance. The entire album is like a musical particle board, the kind of junk wood you wouldn't allow in your halls, walls, or furniture for fear of it falling apart. And let's not forget, I can't even use the album cover of a nearly naked Beyonce on a clear horse. Google's ad company censored it, calling it sexual material. Of course, the critics love Beyonce. I suppose, after they lost Kanye West to insanity, whatever it is he's suffering from, they could go, just double down on Beyonce. She's the greatest. There's never been anyone like her before. I don't know whether they really believe that or not, but that's what they'll tell you. And so I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for Renaissance, and the number of studios involved in making this. Well, what are we looking at here? Like 16, something like that? The album is 62 minutes long. That's too long. And how many producers do we have working on this? 20 different producers. 20. So it's not just Alien Superstar has 24 listed writers. And it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different producers. Do these albums make any money? That's a serious question. These people aren't working for free. But as I may have, said earlier, that you want a hit. So how do you get a hit? Well, you hire everybody who's been involved with previous hits in the last year or so. Just bring everybody on board so you can tick all of the boxes. And that is one of the reasons why these albums all sound the same. And people will buy them or they'll download them, and then they'll play them a couple of times and don't play them again. It is impossible to have any kind of artistic vision if one needs 24 people and 7 producers to cobble together a song lasting 3 minutes and 35 seconds. Let's see. Alien Superstar contains an interpolation of I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred. Remember that one? Contains a sample of Moonraker, written by John Michael Cooper. Contains a sample of Barbara Ann Teer's Black Theater speech. Contains a sample of Unique, written by Kim Cooper and Peter Rauhofer and performed by Danube Dance. And there are so many samples on this record that, again, does this record make any money? Because all these people have to be paid for the use of the samples. Again, would it be too much to work with 1 or 2 writers, and produce an album that way? Big records of the past, you'd have typically 1 producer. And many of these producers became famous in their own right. And they would be hired because it was thought that they brought something special or unique to making the albums. But now we'll just fill up the room. We'll get 30 people in a room, and all these producers that I mentioned, that's not including mixers as well. Because typically, we have to make a very special mix for certain songs. But no, some old white lady said the wrong thing about Beyonce, and she is going to be apologizing for it for the rest of time, or her death. That you just don't criticize Beyonce I have nothing against sampling. However, if you're going to cover an ABBA song, just cover an ABBA song, right? Oh yeah, we used a sample. I forget, Coldplay or Madonna did that. Someone who samples a lot is Beck Odelay. Has a lot of producers. It has 6 producers. I suppose the most important being the Dust Brothers. But it was an album was essentially abandoned. The album was abandoned and then taken up again. But there are actual, instruments played on Odelay. Good musicians. Again, I don't know how could you tell whether anyone is a good musician on a Beyonce album. You know that there's a theory that music has become increasingly machine-based because there's a level of sonic perfection that is possible by using just machines that is not possible when you're using, actual instruments. But I'm trying to remember the name of the blogger. What's his name? Akino Kure, he calls himself. He had an interesting piece a few months ago about how it seems that new music is simply not selling and it's not being played either. Because Madonna sampled the string riff from Voulez-Vous for Hung Up. Thanks for that, Pelcasso 88. Talking of Sting, that Every Breath You Take sample by P. Diddy was probably the worst example, says Blacklisted. That didn't work out. Well, I mean, cover the song or write your own song. What is it that P. Diddy actually does? I mean, he's rubbish as a rapper. I think rap is banned in Dagestan, says Ruslan Akhmetov. ABBA almost never lets anyone sample their music. They also don't allow any remixes. Jeffrey Pye says natural instruments are flawed, and that's why they are good. Jogakin666 says, I always confuse Beck and Moby. Well, Beck has hair, and Moby doesn't. Also, Beck wears glasses. Moby wears glasses, and Beck doesn't. And you've given this song more time than a pop station, says Dawn Willis. No, I'm just, fascinated that, Beyonce is now, she's embroiled in all this controversy because of something that some old white lady said about her. And also because she uses the word SP-Z, and she's accused of stealing music from someone else. That goes on a lot these days because if your song gets stolen, a lot of these plagiarism claims are bogus. But, if you're some little known musician and Kanye West decides that he is going to, steal something from you, as he did from a Swiss musician, their position is, we have all the lawyers in the world, and we have all the money in the world, and you don't. So good luck going broke trying to get justice. An English DJ, electronic music performer, found that Kanye West had taken something, a sample, and it was a terrible sample. And so he said, well, look, I'll fix it for you, okay? And the word came back from Kanye West people, this is our music now. Is it? Because it's pretty clear that you just stole it. So let's talk about literature. This is from Alexandru Constantin, who has a Substack called the Dacian or Dacian, No Country for Young Men. These days, I am loath to crawl down into the filth and muck of culture war commentary, but the current literary discussion on Twitter compels me. As the power of Twitter compels you. Joyce Carol Oates tweeted, a friend who is a literary agent told me that he cannot even get editors to read first novels by young white male writers, no matter how good. They are just not interested. This is heartbreaking for writers who may in fact be brilliant and critical of their own privilege. Well, it's been known that the publishing industry has been run by women for decades. The lefty elder writer Joyce Carol Oates went against the grain and stated the fact that anyone with the slightest interest in the publishing and literary world already knows that young white men are not welcome and are actively discriminated against in the literary publishing world. I have an idea here. This is $1 million idea, but you can have it if you want, free. That you write a novel, and I suppose you'd have to be Chinese or pretend to be Chinese or Chinese American, but it's big picture stuff, okay? Being gay and Chinese in Seattle during grunge. I tell you, that set a bidding war off. 1 or 2 million easily for that book. In fact, it'd be funny to get someone to write it, just as a hoax. This isn't shocking. We all know this. It has been blatant across the board in almost every artistic community, from theater to film. Hollywood has open racial quotas, and you can find numerous articles discussing how agents drop white actors because of these race-based requirements. Anyone who isn't stupid or dishonest knows that the publishing industry is dominated by upper middle-class cat moms and wine ants who only want to publish SSRI memoirs about Ivy League women. And I'm not going to repeat that. It's too crude. Alex Perez wrote about this over a year ago in his fantastic article, The New Literary Bad Boys. The publishing world is still dominated by a very specific type of rising star. She is online, progressive, and impeccably feminist. She has an elite background and got her BA at a Northeastern liberal arts institution before picking up a postgraduate qualification or two. Currently, she resides in the gentrified part of Brooklyn. Ironically, these beneficiaries of a push for inclusion have shaped a literary scene that is as lacking in diversity as their apartment blocks. They consider two types of books worthy of publication: the female-narrated elite world comedy of manners and the multicultural narrative of brown victimization and suffering. What they especially don't consider worthy, which explains its disappearance from the publishing industry altogether, is the heterosexual male Bildungsroman. It's over, unquote. What is interesting is that a boring lefty like Oates is pointing this out. The replies are the predictable, dishonest bullshit gaslighting, the usual, this is not happening, but if it is, it's a good thing because white men suck. If you have any doubt that racist hatred towards young white males exists, spend a few minutes looking through the replies. Out of curiosity, I ducked into Barnes & Noble today and took a look at the new releases. A quick scan makes it clear that 85% or more of the newly released hardcover novels are written by women, and looking at the shelves, I couldn't find one novel written by a young male author. I took a few pictures. But this isn't happening, according to literary agents on Twitter. So let's be honest. If you are a young white guy, you are not welcome in any mainstream professional artistic community, least of all literary publishing. Not that the literary publishing world is welcoming to non-white masculine men either. Kyle Connor from Orange County isn't being replaced by DeAndre Jones from Compton. Both are tossed in the waste bin in favor of wine ant fiction and the occasional upper-class immigrant oppression story. Why do I care? Simple, because I'm a white man and because I enjoy reading novels by other white men. The most ridiculous and disgusting line of thought found in the above discussion is that because publishing has been historically dominated by white men, the printing press and the industry was invented by white European men, it's okay for young white men today to be discriminated against and their stories should be ignored. Young white men today, from the later end of Gen X, millennials, all through whatever the hell the current young adults are called, need a voice more than ever. We live in an atomized bug world where the normal is ignored and degeneracy and atypical stupidity is celebrated front and center. Entire generations of males, white or otherwise, are demonized, ignored, poisoned with SSRIs and left to live a life of emptiness glossed over with video games and pornography. Our society no longer champions the athlete, the artist, the achiever. Instead, it applauds the failure, the obese mutant, the self-castrated loser, the cultural mockery. So I care because I want to read today's young Hemingway, Fitzgerald, McCarthy, and Pynchon. As a millennial man, I want to read literature written by other males of my generation, and I know that many like me want the same thing. The most dangerous game you can gamble on is one where you don't understand the rules while your opponent does. Young men writing and submitting for an industry where they are not wanted and actively discriminated against is a tremendous waste of time and demoralizing to those who do not know the rules of the game. Accept reality and move on. Don't stop writing, but don't stop putting what you have to say out there. There is an audience, but you have to find it on your own because all the mainstream channels are closed off, if not outright hostile. Build new communities, team up with others and trade services, find independent publishers and editors, commission art and advertising work from friendly artists and creatives. The faster that you accept that the traditional world is closed off to you, the faster you can move on and create great work. Most of all, remember that the audience is there. If you create good work, people will read it and share it with others. You can be sure I will. And this is from the Substack of a man called Alexandru Constantin. People do like to read about people like themselves. Of course, this is going to be very skewed if people who look like you are not allowed to publish anymore. And, we don't want any of those books written by dead white males either. It's time to break another ceiling or something like that. Let's take a look at the chat. Yes, these books for women, can a woman, have it all? Oh, I'm 38 years old. And, when is the one going to show up? That's not going to happen. You waited too long. I'd say the one before that, phone book one by David Foster Wallace. I think centos are basically the poetic form of sampling. Are there any great poets known for writing them? Can't think of any. After you graduate to Eurofolk, everything sounds crass and sordid, says Ruslan Akhmatov. Chogokin 666 says Anthony Burgess is great. Well, he's one of my favorites, certainly. I suppose there's a kind of didactic quality about a lot of his work. He was a school teacher for many years. It's not like Nabokov. You can see that Nabokov is showing off his erudition. I'm smarter than any of you. One of the reasons for the creation of the slang Nadsat in A Clockwork Orange is that Anthony Burgess decided he could write a short novel that was going to teach people a couple hundred words of Russian, like Horror Show, which is pretty funny. Horror Show, it's good, right? But Horror Show sounds the opposite. Someone likes Galaxy 5000. New Gold Dream album is an 80s masterpiece, as Blacklisted. That would be The Simple Minds. And maybe I can get a grant to write about being celibate, white, and Kansan in Seattle during the grunge craze. I suffered, says Visionary Companion. Oh, Lena Dunham. There was a piece written about Lena Dunham and this new movie that she's made, but this new movie is just so disgusting that I thought, I can't say that, I can't say that, I can't say that. So I'm going to spare you. Oh, Helper likes Fog Hat. I remember them being mocked in Cream magazine as Frighard and, stuff like that. Because, the obviously fake name, Fog Hat. Moby got his name because Herman Melville is a distant relative. A story so stupid it must be true, says Hauper. And I had music ripped off from me many years ago and was used in a French birth control commercial, says Jeffrey Pye. Golly. Kill the headlights and put it in neutral. Yes. Beck. Choking on the splinters. I love that line. So, let's talk about Montana. This is from another Substack by a man called Isaac Simpson, and it is called "There's Gonna Be a War in Montana." And why would that be? Well, let's find out. An analysis of visible propaganda in Bozeman, Big Sky, and Three Forks. Disclaimer, this article in no way seeks to promote, initiate, or glorify violence in Montana. It's merely a depiction of symbols and propaganda that suggest that such a conflict could occur. In popular culture, protagonists and antagonists battle eternally for Montana's precious land. Country folk fight off city folk in Yellowstone and the podcast Land Grab, a podcast about the place we call Montana. Long before that, Montana, 1950, pits sheep farmers against cattle farmers. In Last of the Dogmen, 1995, cowboys face Cheyenne Indians. Of the 14 major film/TV projects scheduled to be shot in Montana, every single one involves some take on the battle for Montana's soul, and Montana's soul is in its land. Land conflicts have led to at least one recent murder, but despite Yellowstone's depiction of ranchers, our heroes, massacring greedy real estate developers with machine guns, so far Montana hot wars have been relegated to fiction. My wife, toddler, and I attended a family reunion on a ranch in Tom Minor Basin, one of the most beautifully preserved parts of the state, for a week. 6 years ago, I attended the same event at the same ranch. There is indeed something special about the land, and particularly the sky in Tom Minor Basin. Rural Montana is astonishing. I won't bore you with more cringy descriptions because that's all there is to say. Jockeying for Montana's land provides great stakes for drama because the prize is priceless. More interesting to me were the parts of Montana I saw by accident. A new coldness grips the relationship between visitors and locals. I first noticed it at the ranch. 6 years ago, the kitchen helpers were a happy mix. The chef was known for his thoughtful local cuisine, elk with au jus, beef burgers from ranch cattle, loaded baked potatoes, hearty mac and cheese. The servers wore big smiles. The progressive boomers attending the reunion were comfortable with this type of stuff, the same hodgepodge they interacted with at home. Much backslapping occurred. This time, the help had clearly experienced a vibe shift. They were all white and distant. The food was awful. Boiled carrots and reheated pork steaks, clearly the result of some Aramark-type lowest bidder supply chain. The new staff had been mostly hired on Coolworks, a website for low-paid service jobs on ranches, resorts, and other great places. They came from the surrounding towns, forgotten about, left behind, bright red Trump country. Young women with sloped posture and heavy eyeshadow, barely 18. Their clothes don't fit. They looked impoverished, hungry, skittering. The young chef who had once proudly presented his take on local food was gone. The guests no longer chatted with servants. There was separation and silence. Then my wife tested positive for COVID, so we fled to Bozeman. Throughout the subsequent week, I explored Bozeman and Big Sky, ultra-hot destinations, and now homes for the woke bourgeoisie, and Three Forks, the polar opposite, a totally different world, a razor-thin distance away. I saw two groups of people, an overclass and an underclass, pressed up against each other, spoiling for a fight, just waiting for the littlest spark to set their fury ablaze. Over what? Soul of Montana, of course. One-of-a-kind land. There's nothing new. What's new is the character of the warring factions. They aren't who you see on TV. On one side, you have global interests imputing their values, importing cheaper labor, hollowing out Montana's attractions, and selling them to an international bourgeoisie for maximum profits. On the other, you have the new underclass. Not the friendly Christian country folk of times past, and not cowboy hat Republican rancher dad either. No, these are a new kind of country person. Angry, exasperated, poor, Trump-loving service workers, the oxy takers, the meth cookers, the eaters of Chick-fil-A. This group is acutely aware of just who controls Bozeman and Big Sky and believe that the same people are coming for their territory. And they're right. If you listen, you can hear the two groups screaming at each other in silence, waiting for their very own Gabrielo Princip to spark this thing off. On the one-lane road to Big Sky, next to the idyllic river runs through it location Gallatin River, there's a stretch of 3 straight miles of home decor stores. High-end statuary, moose fountains, moose-sized twigs, totem poles, explosions of roses, pallets of expensive stones. A stone hauler is a bitch to end up behind because the stones shuffle out of the top of the trailer like pennies in a coin pusher arcade and slam into your windshield like rock mosquitoes sent to puncture your child. On the ride up, my wife became James Brown. Ah, yow, good God, oh no. In town, in what's ostensibly the wild, rugged mountains, I see 3 separate women riding bicycles with helmets on, safe under the fluorescent street lamps that definitely aren't secretly powered by coal. The air smells like exhaust. SUVs line up at a squawking, blind-friendly crosswalk. There's fresh asphalt and a labor shortage. In the long line at the understaffed co-op, construction workers in neon vests clutch single tall boys. The restaurants won't answer the phones or take walk-ins. A Chinese family of 8, rejected from the flatbed restaurant, wanders down Candy Cane Lane, forlorn and hungry. Big Sky is Wright's terrible fantasy, the soul of private equity made flesh. Thin walls, $23 flatbreads, yoga pants, white people overpaying for ski condos they use twice a year. Third wave coffee seeped in. Then female-owned, trademark, retail stores with names like Twig and Whistle and Bird in Hand. Then REI, then finally Starbucks. The home buyers think it's a good thing. Nice to have the comforts of home out here in the woods. Jen needs her cold brew. It's like not even a choice. Big Sky is a gingerbread land for bourgeois cattle who, distracted by golf or skiing or fly fishing or hiking or anything else they can possibly do with carbon fiber poles, somehow don't see the mechanical claw shifting, siphoning, sucking above their heads. Bozeman is much the same, unrecognizable from even 6 years ago, even further down the path to hollowed out soullessness. Where Big Sky is sold as Marshmallow Puff Mountain, Bozeman is packaged as cosmopolitan outdoor person's paradise. Bozeman is nature's playground, no matter the season, whether you ski, snowboard, hike, fish, or just want to go for a scenic drive. The local spend on Patagonia and Lululemon alone must crack $10 million a year. Bland and boxy hedge fund chic architecture, sometimes called Minecraftsman, developer modern, or LOMO, has taken over. Work, play, lived. Lofts with local hazy IPA on tap. Sidewalk sculpture series featuring abstract takes on local animals. Feminist bookstore that kindly asks you to wear your mask. Ukraine flags. Translucent rainbow heart decals in the upper right-hand corner of almost every storefront. Treeline Coffee Roasters is triple rainbowed. Inside, perfect cappuccinos and a species of constantly hiking 37-year-old women in $78 running shorts with the butt zipper pocket. Maybe recent transplants, brand managers, boulderers, drinkers of local IPA. At happy hour, she meets a running group at a chain gastropubs with names like Smoke and Fire and The Foundry, rubbery brisket, frozen bison burgers, spicy rigatoni, French fries covered in Old Bay. Eat local. Even at the dive bar, it's purple hair and tattoos. Baseball on the TVs, the only cowboy hats ironic. Not even a biker left. Alexander Skarsgård in another third-wave coffee shop talking loudly in Swedish. A girl in Yeezys and a Prada purse window shops Twig and Whistle. Her tall, impossible jawline Panama hat boyfriend crinkles his tan crow's feet and attempts a Reaganite howdy. Before, all this could be excused as the seasonal cycle of a ski town. The point is skiing, not culture, so who cares if the localism is real or the mask at the end of the proboscis tube feeding back to international banks. But that's the old cycle, the old class, the old morality. Now, ski towns are towns. People stay in Big Sky year round. The occupational class flees the city. I mean, why not, honey? We can ski in the winter and just like chill in the summer. It's getting bad around here. We love hiking. Why not just live in nature all the time? So now in July, the one-lane road from Bozeman to Big Sky looks like Los Feliz Boulevard at 3 p.m. on a Friday, plus Pebble torpedoes. 26 minutes away, Three Forks, Montana. Stick with a different disease. If Bozeman has parasites, Three Forks has dysentery. 2,000 impoverished white people play host to stragglers who fall in like expensive pebbles over the edge from Bozeman. A beaten down Main Street, a few residential blocks, an electron cloud of mobile homes and trailers with kids playing out back and parents drinking out front. You've seen the amount of Trump flags that supporters put on boats and cars. These aren't the mild-mannered conservatives of yore. Their propaganda yells, shrieks something the other side refuses to hear. In Three Forks, every vehicle is a pickup truck, and in every track pad, a hostile dog, and in every bumper, a hostile statement. My carbon footprint is bigger than yours. Proud to be everything a liberal hates. Welcome to Montana. Now go home. We the people. Palpable nativism. An ungoogleable blood and soil biker gang thunders through town. On the beautiful plantation porch of the Sacagawea Hotel, the country station plays 14 hours a day. These are my people. This is where I come from. We're given this life everything we've got and then some, but it ain't always pretty, but it's real. That's the way we were made. Wouldn't have it any other way. A woman eyes me from a porch swing, sees me clacking on my laptop, and says to her family, think of our ancestors sitting out here with books. Now people have laptops. No elevator at this hotel, no disabled access, no concierge even. Just a fine dining restaurant that serves dressed up versions of the food from the basement bar, a locals hangout, one of 3 dives in the span of 1,000 feet. Locals avoid eye contact, sneer, or give overtly friendly hellos that feel like interrogations. I'm sitting at the basement bar, not 60 seconds before I hear the N-word. The upstairs-downstairs drama of this bar and the hotel, a manifestation of the relationship between the locals and us tourists. They hate us, but they need the money. The streets feel pressurized, bikers, drunks. A man slides into his car holding a clear plastic cup of whiskey in one hand and a 6-pack of Bud in the other. In between rows of teal mobile homes sit obese wheelchair families, cackling, drinking, staring. 2 drunks catcall my wife from yet another pickup. Another bar is full of methed-out faces at midday, sipping away from the sun. A Black Rifle coffee sign sits in the window of a closed gym. We're 20 minutes from Bozeman. No rainbows, many Trump flags. Liberal boomers love hand-wringing over conflicts like this one brewing in Montana. And a tweet from Lawrence Tribe. You must read this. Armed insurrection may be poised to metastasize from the capital to every town USA in our not too distant future. We, the people, need assurance that the military and the FBI are prepared and not on the side of the violent rebels. Their experts, their clergy, crunched some numbers around civil wars. They found 2 reliable precursors. The first is anocracy, which means authoritarianism. The second is nativism, how tied people are to their race, ethnicity, religion, or local identity. Societies with gray anocracy scores, meaning they're somewhere in the middle of highly democratic and highly authoritarian, are susceptible to civil war. High political identitarianism, aka nativism, is also an indicator. So this obviously raises the alarm about hot conflict in places like Montana, where there is clearly gray anocracy and high nativism. But this is a new thing. Montana has always been the site of land battles, but these warring factions are brand new. The Washington Post presents the risk as one-sided, that angry Trumpists are going to soon resort to violence because, well, that's what they do when the modern world comes knocking. The media doesn't notice that Trump flags are being raised in reaction to the rainbow ones, not in spite of them. The anger bubbling up from Three Forks isn't happening because Montanans, left alone for decades, somehow developed into anachronistic bigots unready for the modern world. Yes, Montanans were intentionally shoved out, left behind. Their music, their signs, their cars, their language, they're all born from a fresh wound. And again, this is by Isaac Simpson and his Substack called The Carousel. I'm going to talk about Better Call Saul in just a minute. Talking about folk music. I actually find Wolf's style impossible, says Halper. I find him a very amusing writer. Always have, actually. I mean, he's a revolutionary writer in his way. Use of stream of consciousness. Okay. Fado. Madre Deus is a bit top. Okay, I can't pronounce that. Can't pronounce that name. Ruslan Akhmatov boasts, I am a walking encyclopedia of Euro and Middle Eastern classical and popular music. And what's wrong with Chick-fil-A? Asked Ruslan Akhmatov. I bought a cheap vinyl copy of Eye Against Eye at the shop owned by the Beastie Boys in the 90s. Now it's worth a pretty penny. Moby covered Bad Brains sailing on, and it was morose. He did one of those Boston scene bands. That's when I reached for my revolver. Apparently the record company said, you can't sing that. So we changed the words. Or people are going to think you're a Nazi. Really? Okay. So, oh yes, Joe Biden has COVID again. Did you hear that? It's the Paxlovid rebound. So, okay, here's the situation. You have a 79-year-old man in poor health who gets COVID-19 again, and apparently he's not sick. No, he's not very sick at all. So that's good news, right? Doesn't that really demonstrate that there's not much to worry about? Although people are going to be. The Globe and Mail says the pandemic isn't over, but now we're navigating it in the dark. Ooh, spooky. And Alex Berenson has some news from my corner of the world, British Columbia, that the news about the jab and who's getting infected and who's dying of coronavirus, it's not looking good for Team Apocalypse. So British Columbia decided we're not giving out this information anymore. Until Thursday, the Canadian province of British Columbia provided a clear breakdown of hospitalizations and deaths by vaccine status. Each week, the BC Centre for Disease Control offered an updated count of vaccinated, boosted, and unvaccinated people who had been hospitalized or died. British Columbia presented the data in what it called Vax Donuts charts because the charts looked like donuts and were stratified by COVID vaccine status. Crazy, I know. Unfortunately, in the last few months, the Vax Donuts charts have become less tasty than vaccine advocates had hoped. The dark purple color represents people who've received at least 3 COVID vaccine doses, and the purple color those who have received 2. As the charts make clear, vaccinated and boosted people account for the vast majority of all COVID hospitalizations and deaths in British Columbia. And so BC announced last week that the Vax Donut chart would be no more. As of July 28th, the outcomes by Vax and Vax Donut charts have been retired. A notice on the Centre for Disease Control website said blandly, retired. Orwell would be proud. Amazingly, a Canadian television network actually asked the Centre for Disease Control why it had pulled the charts. The agency's response, quote, as most of the population has now been vaccinated with at least 2 doses of vaccine and many more have been infected with COVID-19, the data became hard to interpret, unquote. Berenson comments, the data became hard to interpret, and by hard, they mean easy. So, season 6, episode 11 of Better Call Saul last night. And like we had Aaron Paul and Bryan Cranston make a return, and Carol Burnett was back, and Francesca Liddy. It's just This episode would be hard to explain to a younger person. Um, remember payphones? Remember checkbooks? Remember VCRs? Yeah, they're all in there. They are all in there, and it turns out that our hero, Saul Goodman, he just loves crime so very much. So he gets back into it. He learns, talking to his former secretary, Francesca, that his wealth had been, taken from him. I don't know why he would be surprised by that, but he feels the need for money. So he's back into crime full time. And it's particularly seedy type of crime. It's almost like rolling drunks. That what he does, he and his accomplices, they meet men in bars, presumably men who have money, and then poison their drinks such that they pass out. And then, oh yeah, my buddy's a cabbie here. He'll take you home. And so they get poured onto the couch, and then their houses are rifling through their suits and through the drawers of the dressers looking for financial information, which is then sold to people who specialize in identity theft. And it's pretty crummy stuff. I know a lot of people on the internet were saying that they were less than particularly enthused by Walter White and Jesse Pinkman making a return. I noticed something that I find amusing. The vehicle that they used to cook originally, it was very late in the show that we learned from Jesse that he called it the Crystal Ship, after the Doors song. And I thought, they just thought of this. They didn't think of this before. Because if you came up with a name as good as that, well, you'd want to use it right from the beginning, right? And a lot of people were talking about how Aaron Paul, he's kind of old now, but he's playing a just graduated from high school man. We had scenes take place in Omaha, which are of course in black and white, and the scenes that are in Albuquerque were in color. And they're rather dizzying, I suppose. That snapping back like that. So there are 2 episodes left, and what happened to Kim Wexler? Apparently she was working at some company that makes sprinklers in Florida. Oh, that's really odd. I guess she's really soured on the law, or I don't know, perhaps she was disbarred or some such thing. Whether Saul is ever going to see her again or hear from her, we don't know. So I liked the episode. I thought it was pretty entertaining. And, is Carol Burnett going to be the man or the person who sends Saul to prison? The show seems to be suggesting that, or perhaps she'll join the crime gang. Let's take a final look at the chat. Okay. Books that made me cry. 20 books made me cry. Several hit me in the head, and the others bounced off my legs and feet. 3 people warned me they were stacked too high, so it was my fault. Tarot Destroyer. I used to own a lot of books, a lot of hardcover books, and I had bookcases, but I had shelves put in as well. And I had a very large selection of books about communism and the Soviet Union and such like, and they were directly over my head. I looked up, I could see them. And one morning I had this dream that I was being beaten up by communists. Beaten up by communists, and then I woke up to my horror to find that one of the shelves had wrenched free from the wall and was just pouring books down on me. It was like I was being literally beaten up by communists. Quim quit the bar 2 or 3 episodes ago, says Palpcasso 88. Well, she quit the New Mexico State bar. I mean, presumably she could, pass the bar at some other state. But that's it. I think Wolf's reply was titled My Three Stooges. I might have had the details wrong, but Update was dismissive and Wolf didn't like him. Well, yeah, who were the other 2 stooges? I'm trying to remember. And there was a Canadian radio host. He discussed this on Canadian radio and became a controversy. That Wolf's idea is that, why has literature become so academic and boring, especially in the United States with all of the crazy things that go on in America? And, when academics take over anything, well, they took over classical music in the West and ruined it for generations. And yes, not a very good writer, so you become a professor of literature at some college. No, that's not good. Academia is very much at odds with art. So that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this, as always, in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.